knew that Anthony was fine. I did the best that I could. I gave him so much love. But I had my own biological child that I had to take care of. Until this day, thought about not feeding Anthony. And I didn't have to think too long. I knew from the bottom of my heart that there was nobody could ever tell me what's right and what's wrong. I couldn't make a medical decision. I had to make a Christian decision. I knew that I could not feed Anthony. There was no questions in my mind. There was no money that you could give me to make me make that decision of not feeding Anthony. I took one look into those eyes, and there was something there, and Anthony looked back at me. I knew that I had to feed Anthony. So now I had to decide on how I was going to feed Anthony because Anthony wasn't swallowing. So I said to the nurse, she was a social worker and a nurse, and her job was to place Anthony in the best home, the best care facility that she could for the 30 days or less that he had left. And so I said, well, I guess I'm just going to have to put an NG tube in him through his nose. Or maybe he can have surgery and we could put a gastrostomy tube in his stomach. But I'm going to feed Anthony. Well, guess what? I won. I never thought I would win this because they could have just said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to take Anthony to a nursing home and we're just going to let him die. Because Anthony was so debilitated, he was so sick that they didn't think he was going to last. Let me tell you what happened. They put the gastrostomy tube in because I wouldn't take him unless I was going to feed him. I started feeding Anthony with a gastrostomy tube. And they kept saying that Anthony would never grow, that he would never even live. But he was growing. When I got him, he was a preemie, because remember his head was bigger than his body. His body never grew into his head, but they were both growing. The head and the body was growing, so Anthony was obviously getting nourishment from the gastrostomy tube feedings. I would make the food myself. I would do like meats, and I would puree fruits, and I would puree vegetables. But of course, just like a newborn baby, you always start with the fruit first, then you start with the vegetables, and then you start with meat. And I tried to do some rice, but the rice would always get really thick in the tube, and so I stopped doing the rice. Anyway, along the months, Anthony was growing. Anthony literally ended up being like maybe 5 to 6 to 7 pounds, because when he was a preemie, he was only like 3, not quite 3. I ended up taking care of Anthony with 5 other care, I would say, chronically ill, not acutely ill, chronically ill clients. But they were children. I remember Monique, who was a near drowning baby. I remember Brian, who had ticks. And these are some of the children that I took care of with Anthony. But Anthony was my baby. And I was going to feed him the best that I could. And they gave Anthony 30 days. But we were already into 3 months. That's 90 days. Not 30. That's 90 days. So I'm taking care of the other 5, and I'm taking care of Anthony. I'm exhausted because Anthony required a lot. Remember, he was a newborn baby. Even at 3 months, he was the size of a newborn still. Anthony became 5 months old, then 6 months old. And I'm still feeding him. And I kid you not, Anthony never had to go to the emergency room or go to a well baby checkup there for 2 reasons. I'm not going to tell you anything that's not right. First, it was my impeccable care, but 2, they didn't want Anthony there. There was nothing they could do for Anthony in the emergency room. They already made it very clear to me that he was going to live 30 days, and if he dies, that we were not going to do CPR, we were just going to let him go. Now, I know you're probably thinking, what happened to Anthony? Well, remember, I told you that I worked in rare syndrome. And then they would come in, they would fly in from all over the country. And some of these syndromes were so rare that you never got the opportunity to see them. I never got the opportunity to see the baby with two heads, okay? Even though I know that that baby was there and that baby did not live very long. But that baby was there with two heads. You're probably wondering, how can some of these syndromes happen and why? Well, the story goes like this: that Anthony was born from a young girl who had him, but she also took a lot of drugs, and so he was a drug baby. And the grandparents, so first of all, that child cannot take care of Anthony, and the grandparents didn't want him. So children like that go into a home, and then the social workers, they start looking for placements. It's called placements for the chronically ill or the rehab. And rehabilitation couldn't take somebody like Anthony. And you know why? Because what rehab is going to feed Anthony through a gastrostomy tube 3 to 4 to 5 times a day like I did? No one. Even today, we're talking about many years ago, we're talking about literally 36 years ago. And I'm going to tell you what happened. So anyway, what happened was I took care of Anthony up until, remember, he only had 30 days, and he was almost a year old. I still had Anthony. I got pregnant with my first child while I was taking care of Anthony. It was exhausting. I had a really tough pregnancy. I had what was called a cerclage. And the cerclage means you get your cervix sewn up so that you don't bleed and lose the baby. So I had to be on bed rest during that pregnancy. Now, I don't know if you hear what I'm saying. I had 5 other clients and a full-time Anthony who was really full-time care. And now I'm pregnant. So the best that I could, I would hire people like nurses' aides to come in and help. And I would hire an OT and a PT that would come in to help. Ultimately, the primary care of these children was my responsibility. The day that I went into labor with my child, and also I was malnourished because it was very hard for me to take care of myself. The day that I went into labor with my child, I literally said, I cannot leave Anthony, that somebody was going to have to bring Anthony to the hospital with me while I give birth to my first child. Now, of course, that they must have thought I was out of my mind. That there is no way that another nurse, was going to bring my Anthony into the hospital while I give birth to my biological child. I had no idea how I was going to do this. I had no idea how I was going to take care of an Anthony and my biological newborn child and my 5 rehab clients. So when I gave birth, on that very day that I gave birth, you gotta wonder what God's doing. So I don't question it, but I knew that it was fine. I did the best that I could. I gave him so much love. But I had my own biological child that I had to take care of. Until this day, I think of Anthony all the time because he taught me so much love that people need to understand. When God gives you a gift, you have to do God's will. And that baby right now is in heaven. And I know for a fact I'm going to see Anthony one day. I do know that. And I do know that he sees me. And that's my Anthony story. And that is the reason why I do the work that I do every single day.